Hello and welcome to the Georgia Voice of College Football. Here, Georgia Bulldogs Live, I should say, on the Georgia Voice of College Football. I am your host, Matt Green. I appreciate you watching this channel. I appreciate everyone who's tuning in live, who's joining us this week. Please like, share, and subscribe and all that good stuff. You got something to say? Jump in the comments and we may talk about it on the show. So, you can follow me on social media on Twitter, Matt_W_Green. I think that's my Instagram as well. So you want to give me a follow on the IG. I'm not the most active person, but you'll get this content before I post, and I'll let you know I'm going live. But give me a follow. Argue Sports. That's what we're here to do. But I appreciate everyone who's joining us live today. So how about those Georgia basketball? Another win tonight. We'll get into the Georgia basketball later, but might be going dancing. It's looking pretty good right now. But let's start the show with just something that came into my head. We talked last week about Paul Feinbaum and how he's not certain about the future of Georgia football and all that. Not that he's like saying they're all of a sudden going to be a bad program, but just in terms of winning national titles, which is kind of the I will say the I don't know, the echelon that Georgia is now in. So it got me thinking, is Georgia a national title or bust program? And kind of like, what does it mean to be a national title or bust program? Like I think first you have to start with a definition of a national title or bust. Like I've never really liked that term. Oh, it's championship or bust. For like in pro sports, it's like, yeah, it's championship or bust for someone like, I don't know, you remember like Marty Schottenheimer's Chargers or something like that. Like a 14-2 team didn't win the playoffs. It was championship or bust. We're breaking it all down. That's not really happening in college. Like championship or bust. Like, are you going to fire the coach, or is it just if you don't win the national championship, that season is a failure? I think that's really what people mean when they say championship or bust. And it got me thinking, like, how many programs can you really even say this about? Like, is Georgia one of those programs? Like, Alabama and Ohio State, I would say are the two programs that stand out to me that are national championship or bust. But like you look at last year, I mean, like Notre Dame and Penn State had great seasons. Those weren't busts, right? Like Tennessee was happy to get to the college football playoff. I think those programs, it's not national championship or bust. So there is some, wiggle room. I don't necessarily think it's a caliber of the program that makes Georgia a national championship, or that makes them win a championship or bust. Like, I think it's kind of a context thing. Because if you look at Georgia, like, yeah, last season, Georgia didn't win the national championship. Like, that was a disappointing season. Georgia, they were preseason number one. But if you're talking about the actual like context of the program, I think Georgia was a national title or bust program from 2008 to 2015. And I think from that period, you had the preseason number one team with no Sean and Stafford and everything, and they didn't win a national championship. It was a total bust. And I guess, that's not 100% true what I'm saying, because the 2012 season where you almost beat Alabama in the SEC championship, I don't think there were a lot of Georgia fans that were not proud of that team and would say that season wasn't a good season. But man, that feeling you had when Chris Connolly caught that tipped pass and we came up 3 or 4 yards short, it was because it was national title or bust. So I think that, the final like 7 years of the Mark Richt era, it was national title or bust. And that's why each season felt like a failure, because Georgia was just so starving as a program. And then I think Georgia became a national title bust program again from 2018 to 2021. Because if you look at 2017, like no Georgia fan, like Kirby Smart, his sentiment at the end of that national title game against Alabama summed up all of Georgia fandom, all of Bulldog Nation, right? He said like we're going to be back here. Like he knew the kind of program he was building. And I wish I had that clip, to show, but you remember it. And he was saying like this program's not going anywhere. We're going to be competing for national titles year in and year out. So 2017, year one of Kirby, 2017 was a breakthrough. Then once 2018 came around, we're what were we sitting at 38 years? That 1980 stuff. Oh man, the 1980 stuff stung hard on in those Twitter arguments, those message board arguments. So you get into the 38 years since Georgia won a championship. Now Georgia became and Kirby Smart got them so close that like that's the expectation. And that's when Georgia became a national title or bust program. In 2018, a good season felt like a failure. 2019, a good season felt like a failure. 2020, a not so good season. And then 2021, you break through and win the national championship. And so obviously do it again in 2022. And so because of those 21 and 22 championships, I think that changes the entire context of Georgia as a program. Like, yes, is Georgia's upcoming season a failure if they don't win the national championship? Like, I guess you could say that, but it's not. This is how I'll put it. Like I started to reference 2024. 2024 was a disappointing season. Preseason number 1, but it's more of the way Georgia played that was disappointing. Like to me at least. Like there was games where the offense struggled, scored like 3 points and a half. There were games where the defense got run all over. Like I think that gets forgotten about. You know, everyone just loves to hate on Mike Bobo all the time, but the defense had several games where they gave up, over 200 yards rushing this season. So it was the quality of play that was disappointing more than the result. I really think, because at the same time, if you just take a step back and okay, that's who this team was. They were a flawed team. Well, now things kind of change with all their flaws. It was incredible that this team won the SEC title and was a 2 seed going into the college football playoff. So it's hard to call this team a failure. And obviously they ended up not having their quarterback for the Sugar Bowl game with Notre Dame, but it's hard to call this team a failure when what they like truly accomplished as a team, like for all their flaws, was almost extraordinary. So it's this weird kind of position we're in, because Paul Feinbaum was saying if Georgia doesn't win a national title in 2025, like questions are going to start to be asked. And, maybe it's how it happens again. Maybe if the offense, if it has the same struggles that they had in 2024, then yeah, maybe you feel like there's changes that need to be made, but it's not that like Kirby Smart is just under so little pressure. Like there's so much pressure, a prerequisite pressure of coaching at any big time college football program. But it feels like, man, if there's anyone who has the cachet built up, like it's Kirby Smart. Like Ryan Day is coming off the national championship last year, and he doesn't have the same job security as Kirby Smart. Like lose to Michigan again and see what happens. Like, I don't know. Maybe if they win the national championship, it's all good. But not having the bragging rights with the school up north, as they say, like that stings hard for sure. So Kirby's sitting here, just feeling good, and I think most of the fan base is feeling just fine with Kirby Smart. But like I think, and I wonder, and this is kind of a thought I've had the whole time about like, because I'm definitely an anti-expansionist when it comes to the playoffs, but I think the best thing the playoff can do, the expanded playoff, is give more tangible achievements to more programs. And so James Franklin, in the previous era has teams finishing 7th, 8th, 9th each year, like one of the better programs in all of college football, and you have absolutely nothing to show for that. Most years, not even a Big Ten championship appearance. And now it's like, okay, well, you're a playoff team year in and year out. And there's something just way different about that. You're a team that had a chance to contend for a national title at the end of the season. And that's just a much more like, achievable accomplishment for a lot more people. Because I think in college basketball, you see college basketball programs with guys that stick around for 20, 25 years with 1 or 2 national championships, right? Like Tom Izzo, one of the best coaches in the whole sport. How long has he been a coach? Like 25, 30 years or something? won one national title, but the Final Fours and the tournament appearances, like all of that, it allows like a really good coach to just stay at a program for a really long time. And like I don't know that the blue bloods of college basketball are in this same sort of championship or bust mindset that you have. Like is Duke or maybe Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky, like they don't win a national championship in basketball, maybe they do consider that season a failure. But it's also there's context, and there's the years where Kentucky's an 8 seed and they make a run to the Final Four or something like that, and you just have that good performance in the NCAA tournament, and now that gives you that feeling of this was a quality season. This was a good team. They didn't win a national championship, but the season wasn't a failure. And so maybe Georgia is in that realm now, that every year that doesn't end in a national championship is a failure. It felt like with the team we had on the field, 2024 honestly kind of felt like an overachieving season with the amount of drops and the lack of run game and the interceptions from the quarterback and the lack of elite defense. Like the defense kind of gets a pass at times, but with like I said, with all of that said, it was kind of incredible that team was still able to win the SEC and get to the college football playoff. So I don't consider last year necessarily a failure, disappointing season. We'll see what that means, like kind of how it feels. It's all about how it feels, especially going into 2024 or into 2025. It's all about context, especially with some of the tough, the good home games Georgia has in 2025. But we got a comment here. Georgia Gal 12. I don't think we have to win a natty, but I definitely want to be in the running every year. And yeah, and I think let's put your comment up there. Yeah, and I think that's fair. Like if Georgia's having season where they're not ranked, like yeah, it's you start to ask questions. But I think that's kind of where the NCAA tournament, the basketball comparison comes in, is that you don't have to win the national championship. Like Jim Boeheim, one of the all-time winningest coaches, was there for 35 years or something, won one national title. And it's because year after year, they were a contender and they were, getting to Final Fours and things like that. And so, they can't all be Nick Saban. They can't all be Mike Krzyzewski. So that's my take. And I'm glad, Georgia Gal, great take. I'm glad since you agree with me. I think Georgia's just got to be in the running every year. And if you look at, prior to the championships, I mean, that's what they were doing every year. 2018 finished number 5 in the college final playoff rankings. Like 2019, I think they were 5 or 6 in the final playoff rankings. Like they've been right there. I think it's how many years has Kirby been here now? This is going to be year 9 coming up, if I'm doing that math right in my head. No, this is going to be year 10. So he's been there 9 years. I think they finished top 10 8 years in a row. So, you got to like where Georgia is. And maybe at least a couple more years. Obviously, the fandom in the SEC is what it is, and those 2 championships can only buy you so much time. I tend to think that buys Kirby several years. With that 1980 thing, man, that you got to remember, that was 41 years, and now Georgia's one of the elite programs in all of college football. So I don't think Kirby's going anywhere. Maybe he doesn't have one in the next 5 years. Fans will start to ask questions. All right. And so now we have a guest on tonight's show. The owner of the Voice of College Football. Let me get you added here. Mark Rogers, thank you for joining the show. Mark is here to promote his book. I have the title here, Disputed Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset. Mark, thanks for joining.
Hey, Matt, good to see you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time. How's the show going tonight? Everything good?
Oh, absolutely, sir. So, yeah, I will admit, haven't read your book yet, but just the teasers, I'm excited to read this. I was a child of the 90s, but obviously I didn't truly experience college football in the 90s. I feel like my first memories were like Charles Woodson, Champ Bailey, those were like my guys growing up. I will say this. My first my first like deep memory of college football is I remember like, Christmas break, New Year's coming up with all the Nebraska Michigan talk in 97 and just being like, "Oh, so when's this game?" And my brother telling me they're not going to play. And I'm like, wait, what's happening now? I was so confused. It was like all the talk of the whole season, and these teams just never played each other.
That's pretty similar experience to the way I would set it up as well, because so you got into college football. Probably there was an internet, but it wasn't like people were on it constantly. And when I was growing up, yeah, it crossed my mind. Okay, why is number one? And I was really into rankings. Like, this is cool. All the teams are ranked, and you get your newspaper on Monday, and they re-rank the teams and all that business. And I thought that was cool from being like 8, 9 years old. But I would wonder on New Year's Day, why is number one playing number 7? Why is number two
Yeah.
playing number 4? 3's playing like 14. What? And it didn't take long before I learned that, okay, the bowl tie-ins with the conferences and all that. Okay, that's cool. The SEC champ goes to the Sugar Bowl. I think that's cool, but it doesn't kind of make sense. And Matt, I was the nerd that in high school wrote a 10,000 word essay on why there should be a 16-team college football playoff. So that was a long time before a playoff ever existed. So basically, this book, Disputed National Champions. So for anybody that's interested, there's a link in the description section of this video and all the videos on the network, and you can grab it right there and give it a look and see what the description is. But we're going to tell you about it right now. So I basically, Matt, consider the decade of the 1990s to be the most formative, impactful decade in terms of determining a champion, because from the time the AP poll started in 1936 up until the early 90s, college football didn't change. The AP writers at the end of the season, they voted on who the champion was. The coaches poll came out. There was at times, like you just mentioned in 1997, a split national championship. Usually there wasn't. Usually they agreed. And that was another aspect of New Year's Day that was interesting, is I'd watch the Cotton Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Sugar, the Orange, and we would go to bed and not know who the national champion was. It was different than every other sport. Like, you'd go to bed
That's
and be
wild
like,
to me.
we think so-and-so is going to be, but number one lost to number 3. So is number 3 going to be number 1, or is number 2 going to be number 1? Like, you would generally know they're probably going to be number 1, but you'd have to wake up and get the morning paper to see who actually won the national championship. And
Great
so it
Sugar
was
Bowl
crazy.
performance, guys. I hope we're number 1.
Yeah, it's really, really odd. You had a year like 1983 where Miami went from number 5 to number 1 after they beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. So the 1990s is what I consider to be the most formative decade to transform all that, to go from, okay, strictly a poll era to at least there was this bowl alliance and bowl coalition agreement in 1992 was the first year after there was a split between Miami and Washington to say, okay, we're going to get 1 and 2 together at least. We're going to bypass the bowl tie-ins at least to get 1 and 2 together. But that was even marred because the Pac-10 and the Big Ten were like, no, we want to go to the Rose Bowl, so leave us out of it. And so then, of course, we had the BCS finally took hold in 1998 and so forth. So basically what I do here, Matt, is I go through every season and I break down, okay, what were the big storylines going into the season? Who was expected to be competing for a national championship? Was there a certain storyline that was kind of overriding everything in college football? And then how did the season play out? Where were the big games, the big matchups, the big controversies, the big plays? And so then leading into postseason, what were the rankings? Where did it stand going into the postseason? And so then what were the postseason games that were meaningful and impacted the national championship? And then what was the final vote? And then that's where it really gets interesting. Okay, what was the final vote? Was this vote credible? Was it valid? Was it fair? Who got screwed? Did anybody get screwed? Who got left out? And then the end of each chapter basically determines to a certain extent, okay, what's the lasting impact of this season on college football history? What propelled off of this season's results that mattered later? Was it the end of an era, the beginning of a dynasty? What happened this particular season? And then, Matt, to get to the fun part of the book is this. I didn't want to write just a history book, because even though I'm into college football history, I know that for a lot of people that would be like, okay, well, that's already happened. That's a history book. So we take each one of these seasons and we put it into the various formulas that would follow. So we take each season and say, if this was during the BCS era, this is what would have been the outcome. In a 14 playoff, this is what the outcome would have looked like. In a 12-team playoff, this is the outcome. In a 14-team playoff, this is the outcome, which really makes for some interesting rankings and conclusions to these seasons when you put it into the formats and the models that would come later.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. A hypothetical exercise for sure.
Yeah.
So what do you think it was about the 90s that made them so impactful? Like why did it seem like the change from the 90s? And this is kind of my thing, is it's like there has been so much change in college football, but it feels like that era of like the 90s to 2000s is like the change everyone like approved of, and they're like, we need to go back to those when the conferences made sense. It's like these conferences have been changing all the time for the last 100 years. But yeah, what was it about the 90s that kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, I just think that the 90s is kind of a sweet spot, and the early portion of the 2000s in regards to this was always evolving as a business. Obviously, I think one of the tensions in college football, and we've seen it play out over the last few years with NIL and the transfer portal, is that this has become a big business, but it started out basically as college students going to class, being students, and just athletics being on the side. And so it was basically a club sport if you want to go back to 1900 or 1910, but it obviously became popular and people wanted to watch it and see it. And then with the advent of television, of course, it exploded. And then anytime money gets introduced to anything, it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it obviously introduces a lot of potential greed, and certain interests have to be protected. And so it became a business, but the model was still student athlete and more academic minded. It was the structure of college football, but money changed things. And so I don't think people had an issue, or much of an issue. I don't know how much talk there was in the 1960s that, okay, we voted for a national champion, and what about these other teams that kind of got screwed? I don't know that everybody was happy to go to their bowl game and play out the season, much like you were talking about with basketball at the end of the season, kind of evaluating, that's decent. We went to the Sweet 16 or we went to the Elite Eight. We feel good about that. And I just think that that was more of a collegial kind of mindset. But the more money that was introduced and the more that these big brands got together and played on New Year's Day, the more people were like, well, we would love to see these two teams play. And there's going to be big money to put these two teams on the same field. So let's make this happen. And that all changed in the 1990s.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess the conferences too, with the SEC being the first to have a conference championship, that was something that was a huge impact in the 90s. But what's I guess what do you want people to take away from this book?
Well, before I answer that question, that's another portion that I didn't hit on, is there were no conference championship games in 1990. As you allude to, the SEC was the first to establish one in 1992, and then the Big 12 in 96. And we go through the entire decade, and there was never a Pac-10 or a Big 10 championship or an ACC championship game at this point by the end of the decade. And so I also go through that exercise. Who would have been in the 1990 SEC championship game? And so I run through all the conference championship games and what they would have looked like then and what they would look like theoretically, although it's, there's scheduling differences that you can't account for, but what all those conference championship games would look like today as well. I just want people to not necessarily take the championship results verbatim as they are presented to us throughout history, but actually look at these things with a more analytical eye to say, what about this team? What about them? They've got an argument. Their resume is just as good as theirs. And not necessarily, again, just take the results of the AP writers letting us know who's the national champion, but to look at each season with a more critical, analytical eye.
Is there I definitely respect that. Is there a hypothetical conference championship that stands out to you that just the idea of these two teams playing that year really excites you? There's one that stands out to me just off the top of my head.
A hypothetical conference
I'm
championship
thinking
game.
I'll give you my example
Hit me
first,
with
and
it.
maybe you can,
Yep.
it'll help you think. I'm thinking 2002, we had Ohio State undefeated that year, and Iowa was so good with Brad Banks, and we never got to see that Big Ten championship at that point.
I like that one. Yeah. Ohio State's the national champion. If you mention 2002 to anybody that's a college football fan, they got to be a serious college football fan like yourself. That's a good point to think, oh yeah, Iowa went undefeated in the Big Ten that year as well. They just didn't play. And that would have been a great conference championship game. Yeah, interesting, because there's all sorts of matchups. Well, in 1997, if you want to get into it, I guess even though they didn't play in the same conference, had Michigan and Nebraska played in the Big Ten together, of course, they would have had to meet on the field, either in the regular season or in the conference championship game.
Yeah, that's true. There's something about the 90s. I see people like, throwing out these hypothetical conferences. And I think there is something about, like, obviously people are always kind of, hesitant to change. I've made my own, have my own gripes about certain changes in college football, but it's something about like the 90s felt like kind of a sweet spot, like you said, of the conferences. Obviously the Southwest Conference was gone by that point. I guess by the mid 90s, the Southwest Conference was gone.
Yep.
So what? Southwest and Big 8 merged, and I guess the small guys got left out essentially.
Absolutely. TCU got left to the side for a couple decades, and when the Southwest Conference and the Big 8 became the Big 12, and then you had Arkansas leave the Southwest and go to, of course, the SEC, and you had so many independents early in the 90s, before they went to all these conferences. And you think Miami, South Carolina, Syracuse, Penn State, Louisville, on and on and on. All these schools were independents. You had a glut of independents to deal with at that point too.
Yeah, so it feels like that's probably one of the bigger, lasting changes of the 90s is all these teams getting conferenced up and everything, however you want to say that. But because I feel like that is my biggest gripe, kind of what I was getting onto is college football is such a regional sport that as much as these conferences keep changing, that's where I'm like, we got these conference games of Oregon and Rutgers over here. Like, something I can't wrap my head. West Virginia has been in the Big 12 for like a decade now, but it still feels weird, a conference game in Texas Tech in West Virginia.
Yeah, nothing speaks Big Ten like a Rutgers Oregon matchup. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I think you can relate to as a huge college football fan, not just with Georgia, but I think people when they listen to you for quite a bit get the sense that you love the game from coast to coast. Is what was great about all these conferences is not that they were just separate conferences, but that they represented different regions of the country that had different lifestyles, different music, different food, just different ways of living slightly. We're all Americans, but just a different take. So, when the SEC matched up against the Big Ten, there was this tension, this interesting rivalry. Okay, who's better? Where now, sure, the SEC and the Big Ten are taking over the sport. So yeah, that's going to be interesting from that standpoint. But Yeah, we've lost all of that regional feel. When UCF, the Big 12 was always the Plains, the Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, Texas, that region, Kansas, Missouri, and UCF's in the Big 12, and it
Yeah.
just doesn't. Yeah, that the regional aspect, it's completely torn apart that regional flavor and feel to the game.
Yeah, and I mean, you're watching, and not that it's necessarily a bad thing. You're watching an Ohio State Alabama game. It's like, how many of those players are from the state of Florida or Georgia or something? It's like it's not necessarily the same region versus region, showdown that it maybe once was. Not that teams weren't always recruiting nationally, but probably more regional than it now is. But what is your you talked a lot about the different formats. What is your perfect format? Is it the 3 BCS era? Is it the 14? The 12 team? 16? What is your ideal format?
Man, that's a great question because I used to have a perfect format, and even though I wrote a 16-team playoff essay when I was in high school, I quickly came off of that one. I was more in the 8-team.
Manifesto.
Yeah, like my manifesto at the time, which I don't know where it is now. But anyway, yeah, I kind of peeled off of that, Matt, to an 8-team. Before we went from 4 to 12, I felt that 8, based on the competitive nature of how many teams could have a shot at it. Well, first off, once we went to 4 teams, my instant response was when people asked me, well, are we in a good place? Is this a good format? My answer was, well, it's better than 2 because it just affords 2 other worthy teams that have the resume to stack up the opportunity to win the national championship. But we got 5 conferences, so that doesn't work
Yes.
where I stand. We could have theoretically had 5 undefeated conference champions and only 4 could make the playoffs. So I didn't think 4 was enough. I think 8's a good number. The 12, I like having. I don't like buys, and if you're going to have buys, there has to be to me, like the NFL, there has to be a distinguishable way to elevate those teams and reward those teams that have somehow objectively separated themselves. And I don't think we can do that in college football. I think it's difficult.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the 4 team, I think, kind of tended to be my favorite model just because the BCS was so great and it felt like the 4 team was kind of here's a little room for error. It's like maybe the team in the best conference is actually number 3 this year because they had the toughest schedule or something. So that's why I tend to like the 4, but we really only saw it. 2023 was kind of the only year that I can really remember where it became an issue, but it feels like such a glaring issue. We have 5 Power 5 conferences. I'm redundant. You get it. We have the Power 5 conferences and only 4 spots, but so that was an obvious flaw. So yeah, I think 8 seems like the kind of the sweet spot there. But my biggest thing is, and not to trigger. I know you're an Ohio State guy up there. The Ohio State fans that wanted Ryan Day fired after the 10-2 regular season, I feel like they're talked about like they're crazy people, and like Nick Saban called him out on game day and everything, but they weren't totally wrong. Like this was like the most disappointing regular season of the Ryan Day tenure. But because of this new format, now this talented team gets another shot. And man, I'm not going to lie, in the playoff, they looked clearly like the best team out there. But it's like, is that what we want in college football? You a 10-2 where you lose to your rival the last game and you're playing in the postseason.
No, it's a great point. It is a great point. And I was on Michigan podcast, as I am almost every week, a couple weeks ago, and was making the point that, and I don't know how many people really believe me, especially since I was speaking to like 95% Michigan fans, but I said, I'm not thinking of this logically right now, even though I try to attack this from a logical stance. I'm just speaking emotionally as a fan. How my emotions felt was, if you would have asked me in 1985, 95, 05, etc., what's more important, Ohio State, Michigan, or winning a national championship, I wouldn't even hesitate Ohio State, Michigan, beat Michigan. That is the most important thing. And this expansion of the playoff, we got a taste of it actually seeing Ohio State play Georgia a couple years ago. Ohio State got trampled in the fourth quarter against Michigan, but they got a second chance and came obviously that close to cashing in. And it would have been, we would have gotten a forerunner or foreshadowing of what we're living in now. That, okay, that game didn't really matter. Now, I'm not trying to tell people how they should feel. That game matters as much as anybody wants it to feel in terms of pride and bragging rights and all that. I'm just talking about logistically, how does it matter? Well, going forward, that game, if two teams emerge, to rule the SEC, as we've seen in the past, whether that's Alabama, LSU at one point, Alabama, Georgia, we could see the same thing there, where I guess the difference with Ohio State, Michigan is because of them being permanent opponents, they do play and they will play every season at the end of the season. So it makes it a little bit different. Then I think it'll be a novelty and an interesting one, Matt, the first time that they play a Big Ten championship game the next week or in the playoff, or shoot, maybe 3 times. That'll be kind of interesting the first time, at least for me. I'm anticipating being like, wow, this is kind of cool. There's a rematch. But when it happens like 3 times in 8 years or something like that, it'd be like, okay, this is too much of a good thing. It's diminished the rivalry. Or, worst case scenario, and again, we're picking on Ohio State, Michigan. This could be in other cases as well, Alabama, Auburn, et cetera, playing a last game of the season, where it's like one of the teams treats it like week 16 or 17 in the NFL. We don't need to win this game, sit people down because it doesn't matter. We need to, why not save our best players because we're playing in the conference championship game next week, or might as well just save them for the playoffs.
And that's my fear. Like, everyone talks about how, oh, this works in high school, this works in Division II, works in the NFL. Why can't college football? It's like, well, I don't like any of those sports as much as I like college football. So the more you keep changing, the more it starts looking like those other things. Then maybe I don't love it quite as much at that point. But Jackson Johnson chiming in with the super chat. Let's get Georgia at the Voice of College Football, 2,000 subs. Jackson, I appreciate you chiming in there, man. And also we got another one from Jackson Johnson here in the comments. If you love studying college football history, check out Disputed National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset, written by my guest here, Mark Rogers. Jackson, appreciate the shout out there. But Mark, I don't think I can keep you much longer. But is there anything else you wanna say about this book, or anything you want to tell the audience, or plug from of your own?
No, I'll basically just say that for everybody that's reviewed it, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback on Amazon and elsewhere, that people say it's a good read. So I'm not going to trumpet it. I will let them speak. It's a fun read. Again, it's not just a history book. It takes all these seasons and projects them into the future playoff format. So it's just a fun reality book merged into kind of a hypothetical at the same time. Also want to remind everyone that I'm live every Monday through Friday on the main channel at 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for having me, though, Matt. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir, Mark. I appreciate you joining us. Maybe we'll do it again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.
And that was Mark Rogers, that, as you heard, the owner of the Voice of College Football and the author of Disputed National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset. So really cool book. I'm gonna have to check that out. It's kind of my blind spot a little bit. Obviously I'm a history guy, and so I know the history of college football, but in terms of my fandom and my experience on the earth, if you heard that conversation, I start to really become aware of college football, of the sport, and all the pageantry. I would say late 90s, early 2000s. That's really when my brain starts going. But I appreciate Mark joining the show. So let's keep things moving on tonight. tonight's show with our reoccurring segment. Where I can get my graphic to pop up on the screen here. There we go. Is it? Maybe it's going to. Maybe it'll do that. The 2025 position preview. We're looking at the running back position tonight. We looked at quarterback last week. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper in the backfield, and we gotta focus on Georgia's running game in 2025. So in 2024, Georgia averaged 129.6 yards per game on the ground, 15th in the SEC. I don't even know what they rank nationally. I couldn't count. The list wasn't numbered. It was 90 something. They're 90 something in the country in rushing yards per game last season, which is just unheard of under Kirby Smart and these Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, this is running back right? In the history of the Georgia Bulldogs, you don't see many running games as bad as it was in 2024. In 2023, Georgia averaged 191 yards a game on the ground. In 2022, averaged 205 yards a game on the ground. And it's not like we had Todd Gurley, Nick Chubb, Sony Michel on those teams. Like, no disrespect to Kendall Milton and Dejon Edwards, but they were just real solid backs. Like, Kenny McIntosh was really good. Kenny McIntosh is, I think, the best part about his game was just how dynamic he was as a receiver and a ball carrier. But he didn't have amazing numbers or anything. He's just a good player and was a 7th round pick. Not here. I don't want Kenny McIntosh catching any strays on this segment, because I was a big Kenny McIntosh fan. But in terms of Georgia having like high-end NFL running backs, like, that's not what these teams were. They just had solid SEC contributors, and they had top 3, top 4 running games in the SEC, top 20 in America both years. Like, I would have said Georgia's running game wasn't great in 2023 or 2022. It was fine. Like, it was good. It was serviceable, especially if you're having 2 quarterbacks in 2022 Beck, or 2022 Stetson, and then 2023 Beck leading the conference in passing yards. Like, those were maybe the best offenses in the SEC both years. So to see Georgia's running game at 129 yards a game is just unheard of. And so you have to look at this running back room. That's going to be a big spotlight for the 2024 season or 2025 season. I keep messing my years up here. For the 2025 season, that's going to be a huge storyline. And I've said it before, that was my biggest disappointment from the Notre Dame game, was that Gunnar Stockton was not a big part of the run game. That's what I anticipate with his skill set, that if we're looking at, if Gunnar Stockton is the starting quarterback in 2025, I apologize. If Gunnar Stockton is the quarterback in 2025 all season, and Georgia's pretty good, I'll be disappointed if Gunnar Stockton doesn't have like 500 yards rushing. Like, I expect 500 yards, 7 or 8 touchdowns. Like, I expect that to be a legitimate part of Georgia's offense this year. And, you look at this running back room, you have Trevor Etienne gone to the NFL. Saw him at the NFL Combine running a 4.43, I think. I think top 3 or 4 among running backs the 40 time. I think he should be a good player at the next level. I was really hoping Etienne and Frazier would be the 1-2 punch in this backfield. I think Georgia would have an argument for having the best running back duo in the SEC going into 2025 if you have Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier. But that's not the case. You have Nate Frazier as the leading rusher coming back, who actually did lead Georgia in yards a year ago. I think people kind of forget that. Because Etienne kind of was the number 1 guy, but he missed a couple games late in the season. But Nate Frazier's coming off, and I was pulling up the stats here. I think I had it pulled up. Well, he had like 700 yards or something. I think it's the fewest or something like that. It was who was it? Michael Cooper, I think it was back in 2023 or back in 2003. Like I said, I'm messing up my years all over the place, but let me see here if I can pull up the stats. My computer wants, but yeah, just what his run game was a year ago, and now you're replacing the best running back as well. As you saw Jared Wilson set the fastest 40 time of all time, I think, in combine history for centers. Tate Ratledge running a sub 5 40 as well. Like, Georgia had some talent. Obviously, some of those guys were dinged up a year ago, but yeah, to end up with Frazier at 671 yards, Etienne at 609, both of them averaged 5 yards a carry. It's just, that's not what Georgia's used to. So Georgia needs to be improved in the running game in 2025. And I think, the next, like, man, if you might as well just be blindfolded, throw in a dartboard, throwing darts at a dartboard blindfolded to guess like how Georgia's carries are going to end up next year. Like, I think it's safe to say Nate Frazier will be the number one guy if he's healthy, but we've seen Roderick Robinson miss time in 2023 and in 2024. I tend to think Roderick Robinson is the second best running back in this room. You saw Branson Robinson look good as a freshman and kind of more mop-up duty, kind of getting like his Elijah Holyfield on back in 2017. Elijah Holyfield, he took advantage of his garbage time and he ran hard. And so Branson Robinson kind of was that guy in 2022, and so you're kind of expecting him to emerge. 2023 the backfield was still pretty loaded, but 2024, you definitely thought Branson Robinson was going to be, now's the time he's going to emerge. And he hasn't been able to stay healthy, unfortunately, the last couple of years. So, like, those two guys, like, that should be a solid, top three. But with the health issues of the Robinson brothers, obviously they're not brothers, but you get it. With the health of those guys, I think that room is definitely a question. And so Cash Jones is the only other guy that's really gotten any sort of legitimate snaps in that room. And I think Cash Jones will still be a weapon in this offense because of what he does, out of the backfield and then in the pass game. But I think those other guys just have that more, between the tackles sort of, workhorse ability. And no disrespect to Cash Jones, but I think there's a reason those guys were, higher 4-star prospects. Or borderline 5-star. Frazier may have been a 5-star, but he was in that top 20, top 30 player in the country coming out, I want to say. And then Cash Jones, that top 4, like, if they're all healthy, that top 4 is good enough to have one of the better running back rooms in the SEC. But that's a big if. If is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there because both Robinsons have not been able to stay healthy in the last couple of years. And then after Cash Jones, you have Chauncey Bowens was a 4-star coming out, a true freshman this past class. Dwight Phillips was another one. He's the one that actually got a little bit of playing time, I would say, last year. He had the touchdown on the little jet sweep against Florida, and then I think they ran the same play against Texas. When was that? That was sometime near the goal line. Was it right before? No, because Etienne scored on the play after Stockton got hit at the end. But I want to say it was down near the end zone against Texas. Georgia tried the little jet sweep again, and Dwight Phillips, I don't think he got stoned on that one. But after that, Bo Walker is the only freshman Georgia brought in this class. So, not a super big time prospect, but at this point, when it comes to Kirby Smart, like, I get excited about the 5-stars, but I almost get more excited about the 3-stars. Maybe I'm just remembering the few, but I remember the Lad McConkeys, the Javon Bullards, the Eric Stokes. It seems like if you're a 3-star and Georgia wants you, you're a diamond in the rough. We've seen so many good players. Georgia signed as 3-stars, and maybe Bo Walker is that next guy. Bo Walker, just, if that's not an SEC running back name, I don't know what is. That's just that fits right there. So, this running back room, I tend to think, Georgia's RBU and all that. I love that Georgia has the tradition they do at the running back position. Now James Cook's just adding to that at the next level. But at the same time, I think running back is kind of a symptom of, what the offense is. And I like I was talking about in 2022 and 2023, like those weren't amazing NFL loaded rosters in the running back room. They were just solid SEC players, but you had a great offensive line, really good quarterback play, great play at the skill positions, and then those running backs look really good. So, if you just have solid running backs, solid offensive line, yeah, it'll be good. So, but with what Georgia was a year ago, you might need some of these guys to be a little more than just solid, because this offensive line just wasn't great a year ago. So, I'm not going to write them off because it's Kirby Smart and it's Georgia, and they found a way to correct anytime they have a weakness. They tend to correct it. So, I'm curious to see what Georgia looks like in the running back room this year. All right. And let's I said I was going to get to basketball. Let's get to basketball right now. Georgia 73, South Carolina 64. Georgia wins another one, ladies and gentlemen. This team is really looking good down the stretch. I was pulling up. Oh, shoot. That's the last. That's the last time these two teams. But Demery, you saw him National Player of the Week this past week. I was at the Georgia Florida game last Tuesday when he just went off against the Gators, and then on Saturday, Georgia went into Austin, Texas, and just blew out the Longhorns. So that was great to see as well. But I mean, Silas Demery, I'm not used to Silas Demery playing like this. So 15 more in the game tonight. So I think now Georgia's sitting here. So coming into the game. So now Georgia's 9-10 in SEC play. Coming into this game, Joe Lunardi had the bracketologist, as you all know. Joe Lunardi had Georgia as an 11 seed, and he actually had them as the last 4 buys. So they were the first 4 out. Not only were they the first 4 out, they were literally the first one out of that game versus Texas. And Texas was the first time he can ever remember the last one out and the last one in and the first one out playing each other in March. And so that was pretty cool. And Georgia absolutely blew out Texas in that one. And now another win over South Carolina, 3 straight wins. I think they had lost like 8 of 10 or something like that. But now they've won 3 straight. So looking at the box score, Silas Demery with 16 and 4 assists. Blue Kane with 14 and 7 rebounds. Who else? Asa Newell had 11. So Santo Cyril had 9 points in this one off the bench. So a lot of, 7 for Tyron Lawrence off the bench, 6 for Dakota LaFew off the bench. So 8 for Dylan James. So you saw a bunch of guys just kind of, doing their part in this one for Georgia. RJ Godfrey just was in foul trouble, ended up fouling out of this one. So I think he not only playing 17 minutes in this game, but that's 2. Not only is it 3 wins in a row, but that's 2 in a row on the road in the SEC. And Georgia had not won an SEC road game before this weekend's game against Texas. So, like I said, Joe Lunardi has Georgia as an 11 seed in the last 4 buys, meaning they would not be one of the 11 seeds that's playing in the play-in game that's on Tuesday or Wednesday before the tournament starts. So that'd be pretty massive. So now they have Vanderbilt is the only game left in the regular season, and that will be in Athens on Saturday. So I think Georgia wins that game, and I don't think it matters what happens in the SEC tournament. I think right now, I think they said it was a 70% chance that Georgia would make the tournament if they won one of their last 2 games. I think that was the stat they said during the broadcast. Maybe that's Joe Lunardi's stat. And so they won one of them. And so I think there's a good chance. Vanderbilt's a really good team, and I think they were at last four buys or something a couple weeks ago, and now you've just seen them win. Like I think they've won like 4 or 5 games in a row, beat a top 10 Texas A&M team, so on the road too. So I think Vanderbilt's in, and I think sitting at 19-11, I think Georgia's probably feeling pretty good. 19-12 if they were to lose to Vanderbilt. I think that team still gets in the tournament. I think they're in what, like 12th place in the SEC, or are they in 13th? I think they're in 12th. And I think they project the SEC to get 12 teams in right now. So so Georgia's sitting at 11th in the SEC right now. So that's a massive win tonight. And if they were to beat Vanderbilt, then they'd be tied with Mississippi State. Is that right? Or I guess Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, they must play tomorrow. And so Georgia could finish as high as 9th, I think, in the SEC. Is that still on the table? And I think that would be massive for them. So Vanderbilt plays Arkansas actually tomorrow, and so those are the two of the teams that are right around Georgia in the standings. So this team is looking pretty good, and it's been a while. Was it, I think, 2014 the last NCAA tournament that Georgia has made? So it's been long enough, and I think this team, the way they're playing right now down the stretch, I think they might have what it takes to be playing in March Madness. All right, so I appreciate everyone who joined in live. Jackson Johnson with a super chat. I really appreciate you chiming in to the show here. But yeah, everyone, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It always helps us out. The voice of college football. If you want to reach me on social media, that's on Twitter at Matt W_Green. And